Those that have known me for a while know that I have a knack for spotting trends. I came up with YouTube before YouTube, created an immersive theater experience years before Sleep No More, spotted both the beard and rum trends, and now this. Dying, of course, is pretty much the oldest and most predictable trend, but ad agency Sparks and Honey identifies death positivity as a top cultural trend of 2017. But what exactly is death positivity?
I think initially when some people hear that, what? Death being positive? How could it be? We are so programmed to think of death as a loss, as deprivation, as a separation that is difficult to navigate. That is still a fact, but folks working in death positivity believe that there are gifts to the end of life.
If you could summarize death positive in a sentence, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do it in a sentence. I would say that it is being fascinated with death and our relationship to death and mortality and not being ashamed of it and talking about it. Okay, that's my sentence.
And I mean, I didn't come up with that term. I use it sometimes. I was initially sort of put off by it, but more and more I embrace it. To me, it has a similar motivation to the idea of sex positive. Sex positive is easier for people to understand because sex is more fun than death is. But they're both facts of life. They're gonna happen. They're essential to the human race. They are defining. In fact, you can be a member of the clergy and not have sex, but even the clergy is going to die. So rather than pushing it to one side and assuming it's never gonna happen, the idea is to confront it openly and honestly.
Yeah, and I get that, and the conversation isn't trying to...
We're not encouraging you to kill yourself.
No, the death positive movement, or death positivity, is not about being happy with dying. It is, as Spark and Honey puts it, conversations and innovations around how to make death a more positive experience for both the living and the dead. In this episode, I chat with some superstar death influencers about discussing death, home funerals, baby showers, bedazzling coffins, gram parsons, meaningful ways to incorporate food and cocktails into a memorial, and much, much more. Please join me in episode 11 of the Adventures of Memento Mori, Death Positive.
From the Maida Creative Company, this is the Adventures of Memento Mori, a seeker's guide for learning to live by remembering to die. The podcast that explores mortality. Here's your host, D.S. Moss.
First of all, thank you guys for your patience getting you in here. I didn't anticipate the bottleneck thing with the entrance and the beer and wine, more importantly. That was a bottleneck, which is a pun, actually. You can talk to me afterwards if you don't get it. I will be available.
Hi, my name is Ned Buskirk. I run. I'm not sure there's a title that I hold with this thing, but the movement is You're Going to Die.
Ned was one of the early supporters of the podcast, and earlier this year, I went out to San Francisco to check out his monthly event, YG2D. You're Going to Die.
In the beginning of the show, I like to kind of switch the onus onto them. So to start the show, we all in unison say, I'm going to die. And then I feel better about all of us sort of carrying that weight for the next 2 hours. And then we launch off.
Does it come off with like reservation? Does it come off with almost like a confident proclamation? How does it typically sound?
Communal. I think that's there's an ease to it that we've agreed, even if you didn't know I was going to make you say it, we've agreed just in my request that this is where we are.
Typically, a You're Going to Die event is an open mic, an open space where people can share their thoughts and feelings around death. This particular You're Going to Die was special. Instead of its typical location, it was held in a sanctuary of a church, and instead of an open mic, it was a presentation of Claudia Beecham's Thoughts in Passing, accompanied by the music of Andrew Blair and the saxophones. You can listen to my affection for Claudia and her Thoughts in Passing project in episodes 6 and 7. I've posted the full recording of the event on our show's YouTube channel in case you want to listen, because this isn't about that, per se. It's about Ned Buskirk and his seemingly accidental "you're going to die" movement.
For a long time, I thought it was an accident how I came into this movement.
Years ago, as part of a master's program, Ned hosted an open mic in the living room of his apartment.
It was packed, but it was just a space for people to share creatively and get not necessarily their own stuff out, but just get up and share what trips them out, what inspires them. It wasn't overtly death related at all.
But there was something special about it that kept people coming back, and eventually it outgrew his living room. So he got a new venue, and his new place had some interesting characteristics. It was a little sub-street level cafe that had wood panels for walls. People literally had to take stairs 6 feet under to enter.
Really, when things shifted is when it got named what it's named now. And when it got named what it is now, it wasn't because I wanted to create a show about death and dying and mortality. I was organizing an event using the open mic to help a buddy raise some money for a cause.
To make the fundraiser more legit, he needed a name. So his friend asked him, "Why do you do it? Why do you put on this open mic?"
And I remember vividly just hardly a beat passed, and I looked at him and I said, "You're gonna die," And he looked at me knowingly, and that was where it stuck.
And so now Ned has an event called "You're Going to Die" that he hosts in a wooden underground space. But it still wasn't really about death. Until
what really made that shift most important to me and really made the conversation of the night a death and dying conversation is when my mother-in-law died.
The video of this is on the You're Going to Die website, and I recommend you check it out. But I'll describe it. He gets on stage and tells the audience why the open mic is important to him as an artist and for artists. And then he talks about death. He talks about the complexity and the absurdity of that relationship, our inability to truly comprehend our own mortality, yet it's always there. And through the loss of his mother-in-law and his mother, he's creating a space in his life and in the world to talk about it.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Because even with the podcast, it's probably the same thing where you are asking people for interviews or even just telling friends, family, or peers what this new project is. And I say I'm doing a podcast on death. And there's an automatic, like, oh, what's wrong?
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
You're so dark.
Yeah.
And I am a little bit dark. But man, it's the reaction is quite funny, at least from, all we can speak of, from a Western society, but there is this, I don't want to talk about it. But then you end up talking about it.
I wonder if you sense, like I do, that people don't realize that that's where they want to go. They don't realize that this is a conversation that their being needs, like this living being that's half death already, that's dying all the time. I did want to add one other thing about maybe when you say about your podcast, when I say you're going to die, that's what it's called. My measurement for the value is that people react that way. Do you know what I mean?
So you almost want that drawback, because with that drawback, you're getting a perspective. Maybe an example of this is that my mom doesn't listen to the podcast. And she has a friend that she works with who's really into podcasts, and I think she even does her own little blog and reviews them. My mom said to her, I don't know how he got that way. Like, this is a weird thing to be talking about. And I think that perspective is weird.
My dad's kind of the same way, even a little more intensely. It's not like a lighthearted resistance. When I first told him about this show, he's like, dying's for the dead. Like, it's really hard to be confronted by your mortality. I understand that it's really hard to lose someone. I don't have answers, actually, much around that. But what I have valued more than anything when my mom died is someone saying, okay, I'll be in that space with you. And that's why it gets tricky, because we think we're supposed to fix it and we're supposed to talk about it and say this and here's the answer, and say that it's going to be okay, when in fact, like, it's not been okay since my mom died. That doesn't mean that I don't have a great life and love being alive, and it doesn't mean that a lot of good things came from it, but it's not okay that my mom died.
Right.
You know?
Has having this enlightened you or caused you to live a more fulfilled life?
When someone says to me, do you think that I will feel better about death when I come to your show? I don't actually think that is necessarily what could happen. It might happen. It's not what I intend necessarily. But what I do expect and maybe even intend is that you feel more alive. I leave a show every time having cried and having laughed, like deeply, joyfully. That's what You're Going to Die is, you know, for me. And I feel like that's what it is for people, and I feel like it meets a need. Sometimes we'll be surprised by it, but we want to go there. We need to go there.
And if you're ever in San Francisco, you should go there too. Check out www.yg2d.com for the schedule. Stick around, because up next we have the leaders of the death positive movement, the Order of the Good Death.
Hello, fellow provocateurs who believe death is a topic worth talking about. We need your help spreading the word. Be the slightly odd yet endlessly fascinating conversationalist at your next party, and tell your friends about the Adventures of Memento Mori. Want to stay in the loop? Join our inner circle by going to our site, theadventuresofmementomori.com, and be sure to stay up to date with the quest for enlightenment on YouTube by following our channel, The Adventures of Memento Mori podcast. And now, back to the show.
I'm sure you get this as well, that when people find out what you do, everyone wants to talk about it, but they do it in like a very quiet way. So they kind of pull you over into a corner at a dinner party or something, and they tell you about, you know, a death experience or a question that they have, and you end up being this kind of weird vessel for people to like pour all their death questions and anxiety and curiosity into.
The Death Conversation about Death Conversations continues with two members of an organization comprised of funeral industry professionals, academics, and artists that explores ways to prepare our death-phobic culture for their inevitable mortality.
The Order of the Good Death was founded by mortician Caitlin Doley in 2011, and because she saw such an unhealthy attitude and way that we were kind of coping in our society with death, being really afraid of it, she really wanted to change that. My name is Sarah Troop, and I am the executive director of the Order of the Good Death. So there are essentially three different parts to, I guess, the order, and there's the order itself, and there's Death Salon, which is kind of the practical arm of the order.
Death Salon is where the order comes to life in the real world, through lectures, performance, and various experiences. It's like South by Southwest, but smaller, and without the overt branding, and about death.
And then there's also what I kind of refer to as the heart of the work that we do and the heart of kind of what Caitlin has founded here, and that's her funeral home, Undertaking LA. And that's kind of the place where what we preach is really able to come to fruition by involving the families and helping them care for their dead.
Besides the Order of the Good Death, Sarah has her hands in a few different death-related projects. One of the most fascinating is work around the relationship between death and food.
Although it kind of seems like a really weird, how is that related? If you think about it, our funerals are a marking of a passage, a rite of passage in our lives. And we have rituals and feasts for all of those things, whether it's a graduation or a birthday or a wedding. We build rituals around that, and food always plays a part or a role. So I found that very interesting in the different ways that we incorporate food into our death rituals and into our funerals as well.
The blog is called Nourishing Death and has articles from an ice cream truck at a funeral to the recipe for Irish wake cake.
The other work that I do is kind of when this movement got started, and there seemed to be a lot of chatter and just my own personal observations and that of a lot of my colleagues too about the abundance of women at these events, or that we were hearing from, or that were entering the death care field, or were interested in exploring death through their art. I created a platform for that in a website with my partner, Lucy Talbot, called Death and the Maiden. And we feature everything from interviews to profiles of women working in various ways with death. It could be anything from a mortician to an embroidery artist.
You know, I had the same conversation, or at least a part of it, earlier this afternoon, but I was talking about the order of the good death. I had just said that it's predominantly women. Mm-hmm. And why do you think that is?
In having a lot of different discussions with women that are working with death as to what motivates them, it really is an individual thing. And I think part of it is that, you know, death care always fell under the umbrella of women's work. You know, before our death care, particularly in the United States, was industrialized, so to speak, and made into a business done by quote-unquote professionals.
Before that time, it was typically the role of the women to care for the corpses, to prepare the bodies, to dress them, to wash them, and to make all of the food.
Then came the rise of the undertaker and taking that role out of the home and putting it into a business setting done by professionals, really pushed women out of it. There was very much the attitude of, this is not work that you can do, this needs to be done by professionals. I think we're just starting to reclaim that because there's a space for us now to do so.
So everything we've discussed so far, You're Going to Die, Nourishing Death, Death and the Maiden, are all ways in which death positive manifests. But what about the movement itself?
When this kind of thing like first started taking off, or, you know, inklings of it started to begin, and it really kind of seems to come down to right about 2011 or so, where two big key things happened, which was Caitlin Doty, mortician, founded the Order of the Good Death, and right around that same time, the death cafes, the concept for that started to come to fruition. People have really, internationally, all over the world, have really been taking up this conversation of death over the past few years to where it really has become a movement.
I became a member of the order through Twitter, basically, because when I was researching my book, I was tweeting a lot of the strange things that I was finding.
Back with Bess Lovejoy, author of Rest in Pieces, The Curious Face of Famous Corpses.
I actually don't remember how this happened, but Caitlin Doty, the presiding genius of the death positive movement, let's call her, she found me on Twitter, I think, and just reached out at a certain point and said, hey, would you like to be a member of this?
Rest in Pieces is a book that tells the true post-mortem stories of some of history's most famous figures. If you're into astonishing historical facts, go get this book.
So how did you get into that? How did Rest in
Well,
Pieces
it's a
come
bit
about?
of a long story, but I used to work on a book series for 5 years with a guy named Ben Schott, and the series was called Schott's Almanac. And it was kind of a trivia series, and we spent a lot of time reading the news, looking for interesting stories to gather up. And I came across the story of Jeremy Bentham's auto icon, which is now at the University College London, and Jeremy Bentham, the philosopher, essentially had himself stuffed after death, and he's in a cabinet. And when I started researching that, I got interested in this idea of the last wishes of famous artists and writers. Frequently those wishes wouldn't be carried out, something would intervene, there'd be some kind of catastrophic failure. And I thought that it would be really fun to collect a whole bunch of these stories.
Did you come across anything about Graham Parsons?
Yeah, he's in the book.
Is he?
Yeah.
And that's why you should always read the book before interviewing the author. If you don't know of Graham Parsons, aka the Cosmic American, he was an alt-country musician who OD'd in the early 70s. His death story goes that his road manager promised him that when he died, he'd burn his body in Joshua Tree. And, well, it doesn't really go all that well.
But yeah, Graham Parsons is a perfect example. And there's examples like that that go back hundreds of years, you know. And I thought it's really interesting to see how ideas about death change over time and how that's reflected in some of these stories of famous corpses.
So how has, in your time in the death space, how do you think it has changed, say, over the last 100 years?
Well, I think it's interesting because things kind of sway one way and then another. I think now we're seeing kind of an opening up, and I think we're getting more comfortable with talking about death than we used to be. I like to think that maybe the death positive movement, for lack of a better term, has been part of that. People like to talk about this idea that death is a taboo. I don't think it is.
So, quick story. I was recently invited to a baby shower of an ex-girlfriend, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, I went. And as I was nervously walking up to the door, I kept saying to myself, don't talk about death, don't talk about death. Don't touch your stomach without permission. Don't talk about death. So there I am, standing in the living room of my first baby shower, being introduced to the baby daddy along with his father. And the baby daddy says to me, oh yeah, I recognize your voice from the podcast. And then his father asks, oh yeah, what's your podcast on? Oh shit, here we go. Death, I say. And he says, I love death. And began the death conversation at a baby shower. So I agree with Bess. It's not as big of a taboo as you may think.
Since you've written it, and since you've been, I think, a little bit more engrossed or more embedded into death, have you found any sense of, I don't know, a touch more enlightenment in the way you live throughout your day?
To some extent, but it's something that comes and goes. It's a conversation you're continually having. I think there's this poet, maybe it's William Burroughs, one of them, talks about like taking death out of your pocket and having a whole conversation with it and being like, hey baby, how you doing? And then putting it away again. And I think it's something that comes and goes continuously. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you mean. It's really just the willingness to look at it that matters. Bess later realized that it was Bukowski, not Burroughs, that wrote the poem. And it simply goes, I carry death in my left pocket. Sometimes I take it out and talk to it. Hello, baby, how are you doing? When are you coming for me? I'll be ready.
Do you consider yourself to be a fellow seeker? Do you believe there's something more to being human than what's available in the illusory cocoon of our material world? Or perhaps you're thinking of starting an existential scavenger hunt and would like a guidebook to help chart your path? If yes, you're in luck. Go to theadventuresofmementomori.com and sign up to receive D.S. Moss's upcoming book, Something to Believe in, a seeker's guide to finding your big belief. Sign up today and start your journey.
Are you single? Are you looking for a place to meet other like-minded singles? Well, have I got a place for you. A Death Cafe. Started by John Underwood in London in 2011, Death Cafes are social franchises where people, often strangers, gather to eat cake, drink tea, and discuss death. You can find them in just about any city these days.
They always move me, and I always find myself thinking about the people in the week after the Death Cafe is complete. And it's always its own thing. I'm fascinated by the fact that this inquiry into the end of life touches everybody and touches young people. My name is Amy Cunningham, and I'm a progressive funeral director in New York City. I help families all over New York State plan end-of-life rituals that articulate the personality of the deceased and celebrate their values.
Besides being a full-time funeral director at Fitting Tribute NYC, Amy is the host of the monthly Death Cafe at the Morbid Anatomy Museum in Brooklyn. I recently went for the first time and was joined by 12 other people where our discussions touched on ghost bikes in cycle culture, Buddhist funerals, American fear-based politics, spiritual insecurity, death in the media, and surfer funerals. The conversation and the people were both fascinating, and it never once felt overly deathy or depressing. And surprisingly, the majority of the people were in their 20s and 30s, and very, very, very early 40s.
I tell older people that we're in good hands with the folks I meet in their 20s and 30s, our future caretakers, because I think there's a death awareness and real desire to know more about how death informs our lives on the part of these people who I think of as young.
After the cafe, I had a chance to catch up with Amy about her work as a progressive funeral director.
Let me ask you this. Do you, in your short time, I guess, in your job as a funeral director, are you seeing a shift in like this young people participating, or has that always been there?
I think new people are flooding into the funeral business. It's not an easy business to penetrate, but folks in their 20s, 30s, I'm also meeting women though, and men called to funeral work after they've had a career in something else.
Amy is one of these people. Midway through life, she transitioned into being a professional funeral director.
I was 54 years old when my elderly father down in South Carolina started saying that he was getting ready to die. He kept falling off his treadmill. He was one of those Jack LaLanne kind of exercising men of his generation, and at the age of 94 got very tired of life and the fact that he kept saying this is all too expensive. As a Republican, he was saying, I just don't want to live anymore because it costs too much. So he was, in a way, a very enlightened man. It was hard for us to hear, but he kept saying, I don't fear death. I've had a wonderful life. So anyway, long story short, he did die in the care of hospice, pretty much on his own terms. And in the days following, we gave him and planned for him a very beautiful memorial service that in the end had a Dixieland dirge, a very mournful procession of 8 musicians out the door of the Presbyterian Church. And then when they reached the sunlight of the front door of the sanctuary, they burst into very jubilant, Sweet Georgia Brown and Dad's favorite Dixieland numbers. So I came out of that experience, came back to Brooklyn as a writer, so uplifted, still sad that Dad was dead, but uplifted by this fantastic service that seemed to honor him so perfectly. And I turned to my husband and said, I'm sad that Dad is dead, but damn, we really aced that funeral for him. And I wonder what it would be like to help other families.
And so she did. Amy was trained by traditional men who would embalm and conduct funerals the old-fashioned way. But she saw her contribution to the industry as giving people back the right to have their own experience and to educate people on their options, to include green and home funerals.
Funeral directors for the last few decades have, in their own sweet, masculine way, taken experiences away from families to take the pain off of them. And what we're finding is that families today are saying, no, I want to be with my mother's body, take care of it after death, bathe her, dress her. I want to have that proximity to the moment, and no funeral director should sweep in and take Mom to their place with their prep room, embalming, chandeliers on the ceiling and dark carpet. Why do I have to go to a strange place after a loss? Why can't I keep death in the home? Why can't I manage as much as I'm able to? So people are really crying out saying, I want my own experience, and I want to be with my parent, with my husband, with my loved one at this vitally important time.
Amy's also passionate about slowing the roll a bit. For me, before I started this show, I really only knew being embalmed and then buried, or cremation. So I chose cremation, as do more and more people these days. Amy points out that even if you decide to cremate, you still have time to spend with the body, and that the corpse itself is not a dangerous thing. In fact, it can be a very beautiful thing. You can bathe, comb the hair, groom and dress your loved one, and get them ready for the next step. They don't have to be rushed to the crematory upon death.
The funeral is the launching pad for the bereavement year. In the old days, bells were tolled, the community was involved, the news of the death was a big deal. I feel like funerals are spectacles in the best sense of the word. It doesn't mean they have to be expensive. I recoil from the request to make the funeral into nothing.
And one of the saddest stories, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, a friend of mine was telling me about when his father passed, was that they didn't have much money. I think he was the breadwinner, and the mother then associated your representation of how much you loved that person with how expensive the casket is. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of a sad state where if you didn't have the money,
right,
like $10,000 for something you're just going to put in the ground just to show somebody, I don't know, that you actually love the person.
The work I'm doing with pine boxes or cardboard caskets is wonderful because I invite the families to decorate them or bring in letters that they wrote the night before to the deceased, and then we tape them onto the casket, and it becomes a vessel of significant value without having spent a lot of money on it.
Bedazzling the pine box.
Yes, we did it just this week. I had 3 kids decorating their mother's casket, 4 kids, with markers, and as we watched the casket descend into the cemetery, it was marvelous to see that they had sent their messages to Mommy along with her body.
So since you're in this, like a new breed, or I guess an enlightened breed of funeral directors, you get a lot of like the old traditional, old school funeral directors that think that your ways are not right.
Yeah, they might think I'm anti-industry or that I'm out to damage the casket business. And what I'm really saying is that I just want the funeral paced in a different way, and I want the consumer better informed before they buy anything.
And as I wrapped up the conversation with Amy, I asked if there was anything else she would like to add. And this is what she said.
I'm really impressed with how much people love each other. You know, we all read about how fractured the family is today. I don't quite see that in my work, which surprises me. And maybe it shouldn't, because there's a lot of love to go around, and the funeral can bring that out.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is what you call death positive. Thanks for joining me on another episode of The Adventures of Memento Mori. Finally, some positivity. Thanks to Ned Buskirk from You're Going to Die, Best Love Joy, and Sarah Troop from The Order of the Good Death, and Amy Cunningham from Fitting Tribute NYC. Please check out all of their death positive work at www.remembertodie.com. I'm DS Moss, back again in 2 weeks for more The Adventures of Memento Mori.
The episode was produced by Josh Heilbrenner, DS Moss, and Hannah Beale. Theme music composed by Mikey Ballou. This has been a production of the Maida Creative Company. Until next time, keep seeking.